On a sunny afternoon, Kyle finally received his long-awaited admission letter and came to Hogwarts, a millennium-old prestigious school. Here, Kyle lives a fulfilling life. In addition to studying, he also uses his spare time to plant vegetables, raise flowers, or go to the dark underground chamber to provide psychological counseling for a small abandoned animal that has been abandoned for thousands of years. Dumbledore. Kyle is a good child who is honest, brave, kind, and sincere. Professor McGonagall. The principal is right, Kyle never violates school rules. Snape. Yes, Chilo originally thought the same way, but one day, he pushed open the trapdoor and jumped into a room full of biting cabbage keywords of the novel. Hogwarts. I am truly a model wizard. No pop-ups, Hogwarts. I am truly a model wizard. Complete download of TXT. Hogwarts. I am truly a model wizard. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Magical Magic. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Magical Magic in a 3-story small building near the village of Ottery St. Catchpole. 11-year-old Kerchoba was standing at the window, carefully looking at the parchment in his hand. Principal. Albus Dumbledore, First Class Medal of Sir Merlin, Chief Wizarding of Wizengamot, President of the International Federation of Wizards. Dear Mr. Joba, we are pleased to inform you that you have been granted permission to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find attached a list of required books and items. The semester starts on September 1st. We will be waiting for a reply from your owl before July 31st. Respected Vice Principal, female, Maliva McGonagall. That's right, it's the admission letter from Hogwarts. Since traveling here 11 years ago, Kyle has been waiting for this day. As for why he is so certain, it is simple because there are several other special families living not far from the next door. Among them, Kyle is most familiar with the editor-in-chief, Lovegood, who sings the opposite tone. And the Weasley family. Especially for the latter, the extremely eerie architecture and the red hair of the family made Kyle instantly determine the composition of this world. It is worth mentioning that being able to live here also indicates that this generation of Kyle also came from a wizarding family. His father, Chris Joba, works in the Ministry of Magic, Deputy Director of the Magic Animal Management and Control Department, and Director of the Beast Office. And thanks to his innate ability to communicate with magical animals, he is also a renowned zoologist and one of Newt Scamander's few students. Mother Diana is also in the Ministry of Magic, but in the Department of Mysterious Affairs, but Kyle doesn't know exactly what she does. He also tried various methods to insinuate, but all failed. Obviously, his parents had a strong sense of confidentiality and did not reveal any information. Family situation. Well, because there haven't been any prominent figures in our ancestors, it can only be said that they are ordinary, far inferior to those famous surnames such as Dumbledore and Grindelwald. However, even so, Kyle is already very satisfied. At least his parents are both wizards, so there must be no problem entering Hogwarts. Unless he's a squib. And this was already denied after his first magical uprising at the age of 3. Although Kyle had long known that this day would come, when the owl really pecked open the window of his room with the envelope, Kyle was still excited and almost jumped up. Holding that parchment like a baby, he wouldn't even let go of sleep and would take a glance every once in a while. Dear, you have been flipping through that admission letter for 3 days now. Can you put it down? I assure you it's absolutely true. Chris looked at his son who was starting to be silly again with some helplessness and couldn't help but remind him, don't forget that we made an appointment with the Weasley family next door to go to Diagon Alley together today. Don't let them wait for a long time. Okay Dad, I'll come right away. Upon hearing this, Kyle quickly put away the Hogwarts admission letter that had been read countless times, stood up quickly, and knocked on a wooden stake next to him, saying, Groot, I'm leaving. As soon as the words fell, a green little guy jumped out and waved his hand at Kyle. Kyle's family has magical animals, but not many. In addition to this tree protector named Groot, there is also a cat named Tom. Although Chris, as the Deputy Director of the Magic Animal Management and Control Department, it is not difficult to raise dozens or even 20 magical animals, he did not do so. And even Groot and Tom were kept because they were stuck here and didn't leave. It's not that Chris doesn't like magical animals, but he believes that so-called magical animals should not be left by wizards in the first place. Those kept around can only be called pets. On this point of view, this middle-aged gentleman, who has always been gentle and known as a kind-hearted person in the Ministry of Magic, has a very firm attitude. His viewpoint also received support from Newt's commander. Newt also believes that magical animals should be in nature, and has always done so. As for why there are so many magical animals in his magical box, it is purely due to Newt's own physical condition. Kyle has seen this old man more than once, so he can be certain. Just like some magical Reaper elementary school student, Newt's commander also possesses a similar physique. Kyle remembers clearly that when he was 5 years old, he followed Newt for a walk in the garden and witnessed a ball-dodging bird thrust into Newt's arms. You should know that the ball-escaping bird is a natural master of illusion and transformation. Although they are not very intelligent and do not deliberately hide themselves like other magical animals, they have a strong sense of territory and the ability to perceive danger. Once they detect a wizard or other threatening creatures approaching, they will immediately flee. The first sentence in "Where Are the Magical Animals?" about the description of the ball-escaping bird is that it can only be viewed from a distance, but cannot be approached. However, it was this kind of ball-evading bird that was so precise and accurately plunged into Newt's arms. It's simply outrageous. And when he was 7 years old, he still went out with Newt and met a fire lizard. 8 years old, injured unicorn. At the age of 10, the fire crab was almost made into a crucible. Among these magical animals, some were smuggled into the wizarding world of England and escaped, while others somehow sneaked in. They always appeared by Newt's side in various bizarre ways. And this is still the premise that Newt has been staying at home. When he filled the world with a box to send magical animals home, the situation was much more serious than it is now. Every time he sends a magical animal home, dozens or 20 new magical animals collide with him. Over time, it becomes strange that there aren't many animals in his box. With this special talent, it's no wonder Newt was blacklisted by almost all magic departments. After all, those magical animals had a bad temper before encountering Newt, especially those who were injured or pregnant, and if there was a slight mistake, they would explode in place. Think about it, you are leisurely drinking afternoon tea on the street when suddenly a crazy and rampaging human-headed lion-shaped scorpion-tailed beast, or a venomous leopard, pops up next to you. TSK, that scene, just thinking about it can make people break out in a cold sweat. So, what Gellert, what Voldemort, and the Dark Lord have to do their own destruction? Is that all? Weak burst, okay. Take a look at Mr. Newt, you don't need to do anything to make him disappear. Just buy Zhang Fei's plane ticket and stay for 3 to 5 days, drink coffee, and enjoy the scenery. Plus, you don't even need to worry about cause and effect afterwards. Either Grandma Tina is great, she has sealed Newt by her side with her own strength. It's not an exaggeration to say that the whole world owes her a Merlin first-class medal. It's just suffering in the English magic world. According to incomplete statistics, since Newt settled in Dorset, incidents related to magical animals in the department have started to grow exponentially, and the British wizarding world has inexplicably become one of the most popular destinations for smugglers to sell stolen goods. Fortunately, although events of all sizes have not stopped over the years, they have not caused any serious impact, and at most, only some unlucky person was slightly injured. As the birthplace of Uncle Newt, there may also be passive buffs here. However, Chris is not that lucky because of his position. He has to work overtime for several days every once in a while. However, judging from his appearance, Kyle probably enjoys it too. As he walked outside the door, Kyle realized that besides Chris standing there, his mother Diana had also returned from the Ministry of Magic early, standing there smiling and watching him. Her black long hair was meticulously groomed, and she wore a robe with a black background and white edges that was appropriate and elegant. When she looked at Kyle, her light blue eyes were filled with tenderness. Elegant and intellectual. This is Kyle's impression of Diana all along. Subconsciously, Kyle turned his head to look at Chris. Well, he's a bit handsome, and he can vaguely see some of his youthful charm. The two of them are also very compatible when they are together. The most important thing is that Chris is not bald. Even though he is almost 40 years old, the distance between his hairline and eyebrows is still only about an inch. This is in stark contrast to Mr. Weasley next door. Of course, with such powerful genes, Kyle's appearance is not much different. Among the people he knows, he can at least rank first. At a young age, there is a trend of causing harm to the country and the people. Of course, this is not important, and Kyle never takes it to heart. He doesn't rely on his face to make a living. Sorry, I'm late. Kyle walked between the two and said awkwardly. If you could collect that notice, it wouldn't be too late, and Hogwarts wouldn't have left the UK just because you didn't keep the notice properly. Chris looked at Kyle teasingly and told a fabricated joke. Well, let's call it a joke, at least Chris laughed happily after speaking. As for Kyle, although he didn't understand what Chris was laughing at, he politely tugged at the corner of his mouth, thinking it was all to save face for his father. Fortunately, this situation did not last long. All right, it's getting late, we're going to leave now. Diana smiled slightly, interrupting the awkward interaction between the father and son, and took Kyle's hand. There are a lot of things to buy for school, we need to hurry over, and it's impolite to keep the Weasley family waiting for a long time, she said after speaking. Accompanied by a crisp explosion, Kyle disappeared into place. Chris saw this and quickly followed the phantom shift. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Broken Cauldron Bar. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Broken Cauldron Bar. The Broken Cauldron Bar, established in the early 16th century, is one of the favorite gathering places for wizards, and it is also the only wizarding street in the British wizarding world, the entrance to Diagon Alley. After Diana pulled Kyle open the door, the originally noisy bar seemed to have been pressed the pause button, instantly becoming silent. Quiet, just like a self-study class in the evening of my third year of high school, the sound of needles falling can be heard. This eerie atmosphere did not continue until Chris also walked in. However, it still hasn't returned to its previous state, as if everyone deliberately lowered their voices. However, there are exceptions as well. The bar owner Tom walked over with a surprised look on his face and said, "Oh Diana, it's been a long time. Do you want a drink?" "It's my treat." "Next time, Tom." Diana smiled, patted Kyle's shoulder, and pointed to the Weasley family as they walked towards her. "We still have to go to Diagon Alley to buy something, maybe we don't have enough time," she said. "Oh, of course." Tom suddenly said, "Time flies. Little Kyle is already 11 years old, so is this going to buy Hogwarts school supplies?" "Yes," Diana smiled and nodded. "That's a bit nervous, go ahead, you know the location." Tom turned to his side and made way for the road behind him, but then he looked down at Kyle and said, "I have to remind you, little Kyle, if you move that trash can again this time, I will write a complaint letter to Hogwarts." Merlin's beard, do you know how anxious those freshmen became when they realized they couldn't get into Diagon Alley? You can't always add unnecessary work to an elderly person with poor legs and feet being pointed out in person about the good deeds he has done. Kyle still feels somewhat awkward. Obviously, this is not his first time visiting Diagon Alley. But to be honest, as a passerby who doesn't move the trash can in Diagon Alley, is that still a passerby? There's nothing wrong with this. However, in front of her parents, she couldn't say that. Kyle could only sneer and say, "I'll definitely do it next time." Upon hearing this, Tom didn't mind, but Diana raised her eyebrows and looked down at her own son thoughtfully. Her intuition told her that there was definitely something wrong with this sentence. But because the Weasley family had already arrived, she didn't say anything. "Oh, Kyle, dear." Mrs. Molly Weasley warmly gave Kyle a big hug and then pulled Diana aside to speak. As for Mr. Weasley, he naturally walked over to Chris and started talking. The two families have a good relationship, with Molly and Diana being close friends and Chris and Arthur being close friends. It's hard to say whether they made friends because of their neighbors or became neighbors because of their good relationships. After all, in the original work, there was no Chris family in the village of Otelly St. Catchpole, and there was no such person as Chris. Is it the butterfly effect? Kyle is not sure. However, due to the relationship between the two adults, Kyle and the children of the Weasley family naturally became friends. As soon as the adults left, their arms rested on his shoulders, one left and one right. "Hey Fred, look who's here. Isn't this Hogwarts freshman this year?" George's tone was particularly clear when he said the word "new student." Hogwarts can be very dangerous, especially for freshmen like you. Of course, if you're willing to say something nice, maybe we can offer you some help. Kyle ignored these two guys and greeted the other red-haired people beside him, "Long time no see, Percy, Ron, and Ginny." The other party also nodded at him with a smile on their face. "Long time no see, Kyle." *3 Originally, the Weasley family had 7 children, but Bill went to Egypt and Charlie didn't know where he went a month ago, so only 5 came today. As they spoke, several people also arrived at the entrance of Diagon Alley in the backyard of the Broken Cauldron bar. Mr. Weasley, who was walking at the front, quickly found the correct brick and reached out his wand to knock. At the back of the team, the Weasley brothers, who had not received a response for a long time, glanced at each other and raised their eyebrows tacitly, intending to teach a small lesson to some impolite elementary school boy. For example, the jumping powder they just invented, just sprinkle a little on your hair to experience an unprecedented sourness. They have experimented on themselves and the results have been excellent. How to say, has anyone tried not washing their hair for 10 days? What does it feel like? It's simply amazing. If you're lucky, you might even be able to trigger hidden Easter eggs and experience the unique treatment of middle-aged gentlemen in advance. Do whatever you say. The two brothers took out their jumping fans and were about to take action when suddenly Chris's voice came from ahead. "Hagrid. What are you doing in Diagon Alley?" The voice was no longer as calm as before, but with a hint of caution, which immediately caught the attention of the twins. There's nothing they can do. They have listened too much to this cautious tone, and the conditioned reflex belongs to yes. No, it's nothing. After seeing Chris, Hagrid, a 3-meter tall and 2-meter thick mixed-race giant, instinctively shuddered and his eyes were also somewhat flickering. But then, he seemed to think of something, and his whole body instantly relaxed. He took out a small package from his pocket and said, "Harry Potter will be coming to Hogwarts next year. As a gift, I want to make a birthday cake for him myself, so I came and bought some berry seeds." Really, Chris's tone didn't relax much. He looked at the small package cautiously and said, "If I remember correctly, the ingredients in Hogwarts cafeteria should be enough to make 10 cakes." To be honest, Chris's tone is somewhat aggressive. If someone who is not aware sees this, they will definitely regard him as a major villain. But when Kyle, the twins, and even the Weasley couple who had a good relationship with Hagrid saw this behind the scenes, they didn't show any signs, not even their expressions changed, as if everything was supposed to be like this. The fact is indeed so. As the Deputy Director of the Magic Animal Management and Control Department and the Director of the Beast Office, Chris is completely familiar with Hagrid. To put it this way, if Chris had to choose the person he least wanted to see, it would definitely be the key keeper at Hogwarts in front of him, the famous mixed-race giant Rubenhage, who had not run away. Merlin's beard, caused by him alone, accounted for more than 1/10 of Chris's annual workload. Especially the hybrid magical animals he created made Chris a little crazy. By the way, what was it last time? By the way, the snake-body swallowtail beast is a two-tailed snake that is a hybrid of a tail dog and a rune snake. God knows where Hagrid brought so many magical animals from, they can't all be from the Forbidden Forest, can they? Chris doesn't remember when he was in school, there were still snakes in the Forbidden Forest. As a traditional magical zoologist, this kind of artificially intervened hybridization behavior, in his view, is simply heresy and an evil behavior that must be absolutely prohibited. Unfortunately, this kind of thing is not illegal. He has submitted several drafts of the bill but has never received any response. A while ago, after Cornelius Fudge took office, he even made a special trip to the minister's office for this, but was repeatedly delayed by the other party with superb mediation, and in the end, it came to nothing. Obviously, in the eyes of their new minister, the value of this bill on magical animals is too low. With this time, it would be better to visit Principal Hogwarts's office a few more times. At least doing so can make him feel more at ease and also improve his image and character in the hearts of the public. So, Chris can't do anything to Hagrid either. Moreover, the magical animals he stirred up are still a new life, and we can't just ignore everything and just throw them away. Chris can only grit his head, observe, record, and classify. Over time, Chris's resentment towards Hagrid had already exploded. When we met, he didn't take direct action purely because he had a child by his side. Otherwise, he would beat Hagrid up with anything he said, even if Dumbledore was by his side. Don't be surprised, although he is the deputy director, Chris still runs on the front line of dealing with magical animals all year round and has some strength. It's hard to say a pure-blooded giant, but as a mixed-blooded giant and one without a wand, Chris is still very confident. Hagrid also felt guilty and consciously opened the package, which contained only a pile of unknown seeds. In the name of Dumbledore, my visit to Diagon Alley this time was really just to buy some seeds. Upon hearing Hagrid's words, Chris's furrowed brow relaxed a bit and he didn't continue questioning. After giving a few simple instructions, he let Hagrid leave. With Hagrid's respect for Dumbledore, it is impossible to lie about such things. Kyle, on the other hand, turned his head thoughtfully and glanced at Hagrid's back as he left. Not this time, what about other times? Kyle remembers that the three-headed dog Ludwig that appeared in the first installment was bought by Hagrid from a Greek man in a bar. I don't know if this bar is a pig's head bar or a broken kettle bar. Don't think that the broken cauldron bar is so legitimate. There are many gray transactions, and besides, it only provides accommodation here. It's the kind that doesn't check ID, so there are many smugglers who don't have a lot of goods and no records who choose to settle here. A shortage of goods means convenience. Just find a box and stuff it, and basically no one can see it. It's normal to have a transaction with a certain customer while dining out. And Hogwarts has a hunting ground guard who loves magical animals, which is already well known in the brokerage circle. It is not difficult to inquire about his situation. TSK, who said Hagrid was simple and honest. He has a lot of ulterior motives, right? Kyle estimated that his father probably didn't know about Louis's situation at this time, but he didn't plan to make a small report either. After all, who can refuse a three-headed dog? End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Diagon Alley. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Diagon Alley. After careful consideration, Kyle ultimately decided to play tricks on his father and conceal the news of the three-headed dog Louis. Who made him also love magical animals, but he is not Newt, without that unique talent. Magical animals like the three-headed dog are extremely rare even in Greece. If he missed this opportunity, it would be difficult to see them again. Compared to each other, it's better to play tricks. However, as compensation and to make his conscience acceptable, Kyle immediately broke free from the twins' arms and came to Chris's side to give him an apologetic look. Chris looked confused. Also confused is a certain twin. They were just about to put aside the action before preparing the gift and sprinkled jumping powder on Kyle's head. However, at the last moment, Kyle ran short. You should know that their jumping powder has already been sprinkled. Even if you're 1 second earlier or 1 second later, why is it just this time? The twins were all dumbfounded and could only watch helplessly as the jumping powder they scattered drew a beautiful cross in the air and flew straight towards each other's heads. Hiss. Hiss. Wipe. 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 2 quite rapid gasps of air and waves of hair rubbing from behind immediately caught everyone's attention, and everyone instinctively looked in the direction of the sound coming from behind. As soon as they turned around, they saw Fred and George brothers frantically scratching their hair like 2 adult baboons. The hair, which was originally not very smooth, now becomes even more messy than a chicken coop under their claws. To be honest, the branch hats look better than their current designs. Oh, Fred, George, what kind of trick are you guys up to? Watching more and more people casting strange gazes around her, Mrs. Weasley blushed and walked over to the twins, one by one, grabbing their ears and walking towards a nearby alley. At least there are fewer people there, and she can also lose fewer people. Unlike now, on the main street of Diagon Alley, her 2 sons are actually imitating baboons on the street. Merlin's beard. If they continue, the face of the Weasley family for hundreds of years will really be gone. Mrs. Weasley's movements were very decisive, it was just that the twins were suffering. Their inhaling sounds were noticeably louder. Additionally, it was unclear whether it was Kyle's illusion that he saw tears on both faces. If it's true, then he can only say that he truly deserves to be twins, even the position of tears is the same. On the other hand, as Mrs. Weasley escorted the twins away, Mr. Weasley obviously breathed a sigh of relief, suppressed his embarrassment, and repeatedly urged everyone to go shopping first without waiting for them. At the end of the team, Kyle hid next to Ron, enduring a smile and working very hard. But the next second, when he looked up and saw the gaze Diana cast, he was all in a bad mood, grinning and barely showing an awkward and polite smile. My mother is good everywhere, but her 6th sense is outrageous. I have never been able to hide anything from her since I was young. It was also during her time traveling that she had good luck. It wasn't until 5 or 6 months later that she gave birth to her. Otherwise, Kyle was confident that her identity would have been discovered long ago. Really? Kyle scratched his head and thought to himself, with such a mother around, there's really no privacy. Diana didn't say anything, just gave Kyle a warning look before turning her head. This matter is actually not that serious, Molly just cares and becomes chaotic. A pair of twins, but a notorious troublemaker at Hogwarts, their deeds have long been spread throughout the wizarding world through students, even Diana has heard of them. Just the strange things she heard about, such as exploding the toilet seat, using burlap bags to wrap Mrs. Loris during night outings, throwing big feces and eggs under the seats of Slytherin freshmen, and slandering them for pulling pants in class, I think there should be more unknown. Compared to these deeds, learning about baboons on the street is not worth mentioning. Therefore, the most people they see are just smiling, and it is impossible for them to rise to the Weasley family. Excluding members of the pure blood family with long white and golden hair who do not wish to be named. Mrs. Weasley's reaction was only that she had not yet adapted. Whether Bill, Charlie, or Percy, they were all extremely excellent children, and Mrs. Weasley instinctively replaced this impression with the twins. Even if their usual behavior is vastly different from their 3 brothers, this impression cannot be erased in a short while. After all, Bill and Charlie were not very honest at home and when they first started school, but it cannot be denied that they are still one of the best students at Hogwarts. Let's put it this way, just think of Percy's serious appearance as a baboon on the street, and you'll probably understand Mrs. Weasley. However, this situation is only temporary. As soon as there is more news from Hogwarts in 1 or 2 academic years, Mrs. Weasley will gradually get used to it. At least when encountering such a situation again, she can remain much calmer. Not long after the incident, the group also separated. Because both Ron and Ginny are not yet of school age, the Weasley family only need to help the twins and Percy buy textbooks for the new school year when they come to Diagon Alley. But Kyle is a newcomer and has a lot to buy, and the first and most important thing to buy is definitely the wand. No need to lead the way, Kyle walked through Diagon Alley with ease and quickly found his destination. That small and rundown shop. Ollivander. He has been making excellent wands since 382 BC. Kyle stood at the door, feeling a bit speechless every time he came here. This place is simply too dilapidated. The dust on the window can even be scraped off to create a sculpture at the entrance. Isn't it possible that wizards love the sense of time so much? But the Gringotts and Flying Broom shop are very good, they look both clean and beautiful. Or is this the confidence of exclusive business? No matter what it is, you have to come. But Ghouling Pavilion is also an exclusive business. Kyle had been thinking about this a long time ago, and even asked Chris and Mr. Weasley, but until today there has been no answer. Now standing here, Kyle can only shrug his shoulders, seeing it as the carefree nature of a craftsman. As for asking in person, it's impossible. Isn't it offending people? After all, he is the most well-known staff maker in the British wizarding world, and maintaining a good relationship is still very important. However, Ron will start school next year, so we can discuss it with the twins. Please ask their youngest brother for help. Don't say he's deceiving his friends. What does he have to do with Ron Weasley, his beloved friend and twin brother? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Wand Selection Wizard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Wand Selection Wizard. Anyway, the wand still had to be bought, and Kyle cautiously pushed open the door and walked in. Diana and Chris didn't follow along, probably thinking that buying a wand would take a long time, so when they learned that Kyle was going to Ollivander first, they turned to Gringotts. The store is much better than the outside, although it still looks very old and the items are arranged in a messy manner, at least it is much cleaner. With crisp wind chimes, a gray-haired head appeared behind the counter at some point. Good afternoon, child. Ollivander looked at Kyle and inexplicably asked, Did you come alone? Yes, Kyle puzzled, is there any problem? Ollivander shook his head and said, No, of course not. As he spoke, Kyle vaguely saw a hint of disappointment in his eyes. Strange, why should customers be disappointed when they come to their doorstep? I guess I read it wrong. Kyle shook his head without much thought. Okay, this little wizard. Ollivander walked out from behind the counter and asked, So, child, can you tell me your name? Kyle, Joba, Kyle said quickly. Joba. Ollivander paused slightly and said, So Mr. Chris is my father, Kyle said. Oh, of course. Ollivander instinctively glanced at the store door, but quickly withdrew his gaze and explained, I mean, after all, in the English wizarding world, the surname Joba is not very common. Confirmed, this old man is indeed very disappointed and not wrong. Kyle saw it clearly, and just as he said Chris was his father, Ollivander's disappointment was almost overflowing in his eyes. Not only that, he also began to mutter incessantly, repeating whether it was willow wood or beam wood. His voice was too low for Kyle to hear clearly, but he didn't care either. At this moment, Kyle's mind was full of his own wand, and he didn't have the mood to care about what he had or didn't have. After announcing his name, Kyle took the initiative to say, Mr. Ollivander, I'm used to using my right hand. After speaking, he stretched out his arms flat, making it easier for Ollivander to measure his height and arms later. He can't be more clear about the process here. After measuring the data, it should be time to choose the wand, which is also the most time-consuming part. There are already 8,000 wands here, and in Kyle's opinion, even Ollivander would find it difficult to find a wand that matches the little wizard at a glance. He could only select a rough range and try it out one by one. He is ready now. And trying out the wand, like moving the trash can, is also one of the things Kyle wants to do. However, Ollivander's next sentence left Kyle somewhat bewildered. "Oh, child, if it were you, it wouldn't be necessary." Next, without measuring his height or asking for any details, Kyle watched helplessly as Ollivander walked into the counter, quickly pulled out a box from the most prominent position, opened it, and pushed it in front of Kyle. The action was completed in one go, without any hesitation in the middle. "What are you waiting for? Give it a try." Seeing Kyle motionless, Ollivander couldn't help but urge. "Ah. Oh, okay." Kyle suddenly regained consciousness and instinctively picked up the wand from the box. Gray-black, with a smooth exterior and no unnecessary patterns or accessories except for necessary handles. "It looks quite popular." Kyle held his wand, and before he could make any movement, a white light spurted out from the tip of the wand, and in the blink of an eye, it spread throughout the entire room. The once dark and closed small shop suddenly became much brighter, as if a skylight had been opened on the roof. "Okay, great." Ollivander looked very excited, and before Kyle could ask, he said to himself, 13.5 inches, cedar wood, phoenix feathers. It has to be said that this is a very magical combination. A magical combination. Kyle was puzzled. "Yes, it's amazing." Ollivander stared at Kyle and patiently explained, "Cedar wands usually choose wise and insightful wizards. These wizards are naturally calm, and every choice they make is the result of careful consideration. As my father once said, you can never deceive a person holding a cedar wand, and I deeply agree with that. Therefore, people who possess cedar wands often prefer stable and loyal unicorn tail feathers, while phoenix tail feathers are somewhat too proactive. In fact, I have made and sold a total of 36 magic wands made of cedar wood, including 30 wand cores made of unicorn tail hair, 5 wands made of dragon heart tendons, and the last one." Ollivander didn't speak, just smiled and pointed to Kyle. Kyle puzzled and said, "But sir, didn't you say these two materials are not suitable to be paired together? So why do you still want to make it? Is the material not suitable, so it's not made?" No, this is wrong. The wand chooses a wizard, child. Every wand, since its birth, will choose its destined owner, just like they." Ollivander pointed to the small mountain-like wand box behind him and smiled. "The reason they're still here is not because they're not good, but because fate hasn't arrived yet. Their owners are just waiting for the owls at Hogwarts." Ollivander paused and continued, "Moreover, the completely contradictory body and core of the wand can perfectly play their respective roles in the hands of a wizard, which is also the most fascinating aspect of wand studies. Just like the wand in your hand, your father Chris has tried it before, and your mother Diana has also tried it, but they are all just a little short, just a little short. So after hearing the news of your birth, I have been waiting for this day. It's perfect, isn't it? Kyle instinctively nodded. The feeling that came from the palm of his hand was indeed a bit obsessive for him, and he couldn't let go of the wand in his opponent's hand. Although the process did not go as planned, the result was still good, and Kyle was very satisfied with his wand. "So, child, 7 galleons." Ollivander clearly laughed even happier. "Okay." Kyle took out the 7 gold gerunds he had already prepared and placed them on the counter. The first wand of a new student is usually 7 gallons, which is already a very favorable price in the wizarding world, but this discount only applies to newly enrolled wizards. After paying the money, Ollivander bowed slightly and watched Kyle leave before turning to look at another young wizard who had just entered the shop, as well as the adults following him. "Oh, we meet again, Mr. Thomas. 11 inches, hawthorn wood." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Shopping. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Shopping. It seems that you have obtained the magic wand of cedar wood. After meeting at the entrance of Madame Morkan's robe shop, Chris recognized the wand in Kyle's hand at a glance. Because the combination was quite strange, Chris had a deep impression of it, and it was also because of this wand that he first met Diana. I didn't expect it to be in Kyle's hands now. Chris glanced at Kyle with some emotion, but soon his expression changed, as if he had thought of something. He patted Kyle's shoulder with a heavy face. Dear, I have to regret to tell you some bad news. With this wand, you may not be able to enter Gryffindor. Can't get into Gryffindor. Kyle's mouth twitched as he roughly understood what his father meant. Ollivander once said that wizards with cedar wands possess keen insight and are naturally calm, while Gryffindor. How to put it, they may, perhaps, not need to be calm. Kyle didn't expect to be rejected by a college before he even enrolled, which is really sad news. What are you two laughing at? Diana just walked over and asked curiously. She just went to help Kyle buy a crucible, and on her way back, she also made a trip to Wenju to buy some feather pens and parchment, so she didn't hear the conversation between father and son just now. It's nothing, it's just that Dad said I can't get into Gryffindor with it, Kyle explained, while also showing Diana her new wand. Diana clearly recognized the cedar wand, and when combined with Kyle's words, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. Unfortunately, dear, I believe your father is right. Chris and Diana have no idea which college Kyle must attend. In their opinion, as long as it's Hogwarts, the college is the same. Kyle is no exception. Just like selecting a wand, making a school uniform is also a lengthy project, even if Mrs. Morkin is quite professional, it took more than 20 minutes. And this is just the time to measure the necessary parameters. It takes even longer to get the finished product. Who makes Kyle taller than his peers? There is no suitable stock in the store, so we can only customize it, which will take about 2 hours. Kyle thought for a moment, but ultimately decided to leave her own address and have it delivered by Owl Express. It's already 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and 2 hours later it's 7 o'clock, which is too late. It's still convenient to send the package. The next stop of Madame Maugine's robe shop is Lycan Bookstore. This time it was very fast, and in less than 5 minutes, Kyle found all the books she needed. In addition, he also purchased 2 extracurricular books. Firstly, it must be Uncle Newt's. Where Are the Magical Animals? Latest revised edition. Although he already has 19 books at home, it doesn't stop him from supporting Mr. Newt, and he should be helping to boost sales. Moreover, the newly released revised version is also very conscientious, with an additional 30 pages and 7 brand new magical animals, making it highly cost-effective and not at a loss. As for the second book, Kyle accidentally kicked it out of the corner while checking out. Ordinary Spells and Explanations. As its name suggests, it is filled with common spells such as Illumination Curse, Flotation Curse, Cleanup Curse, etc. But the advantage lies in having a large number in various aspects, which is a bit like the magical version of Where Are the Magical Animals, and the price is not expensive, just 1 Garon. After flipping over for a while, Kyle easily took it with him. Although it wasn't very useful, it was still a good way to pass the time. In fact, besides these 2 books, there are many more books that Kyle wants to read, such as Spells, Potions, and Transformations. Together, they can almost fill a piece of parchment, but Kyle didn't buy them. Not without money, Chris and Diana still have a considerable income, although not comparable to those pure-blooded families, they can't even afford a few books. The main reason is that he will soon go to Hogwarts. Why buy books while guarding one of the largest and oldest libraries in the wizarding world? Unless it is a necessary textbook in class or one that you really enjoy, you can simply borrow it when you want to read something. I don't know what others think, but Kyle doesn't want to be a scapegoat. His gallon wasn't brought by a strong wind. After coming out of the Lycan bookstore, I have almost bought all the things on the admission list, or in other words, I have already bought them all. Kyle doesn't need the only remaining pet aspect. Chris has rescued many injured owls over the years, so their family has a very high reputation in these messenger circles, so Kyle has also gained a lot of credit. Every time he appears at the window with an envelope or package, a large group of owls rush over, vying to help him deliver it, many of whom are from Hogwarts. If needed, just hire one with snacks, it's very convenient. Look, we've saved another sum of money. Kyle originally wanted to use the saved money to buy a flying broom. Not too good, either a light wheel of 1500 or a horizontal sweep of 7 stars is acceptable. Compared to the new model displayed in the showcase, this old broom has a very high cost-performance ratio. In terms of quality, there is not much difference, but the price is less than 1/3 of the new broom, which is quite affordable. For example, the Guanluan 1500, which was popular 2 years ago, was originally priced at $300 but now it can be taken away on the spot for only 80 yuan. The pocket money he has saved over the years is almost just enough. Sweeping across 7 stars would be more expensive, around 100 gallons, but it's not that it's not impossible to buy, it's just that Chris's support is needed. However, as soon as he proposed this idea, it was rejected by Diana with a simple vote. The reason was that Hogwarts stipulated that first-year students were not allowed to bring brooms, and buying one was useless. Having one at home was enough. Chris could only shrug helplessly at Kyle, indicating that he was also helpless. However, he took Kyle very kindly to the showcase of the flying broom shop, and after indulging him in it, he walked towards the broken Cauldron bar. The Weasley family, who came with them, had already gone back one step earlier when Kyle was buying a robe. Mrs. Weasley needs to go back in advance to prepare a sumptuous dinner. For a family of 6 children, this is not a small task, even with the help of magic, it will take over an hour. Unfortunately, Kyle couldn't see the twins make a fool of themselves, which made him very regretful, second only to him not buying a flying broom. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Before the beginning of school. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Before the beginning of school. In the following days, Kyle lived a very fulfilling life, spending every day in his room trying various spells. Although he comes from a wizarding family, there were not many opportunities for him to unleash magic before enrollment, and it can even be said that he was very rare. Firstly, whether it's Chris or Diana, the wand is extremely important to them, and even the second life is not an exaggeration. It definitely cannot be casually thrown to Kyle to play with. It's only during Christmas every year and Kyle's birthday that he indulges in it. Of course, Kyle also knows the severity, releasing only illuminating spells or unlocking spells that, even if they fail, have no side effects on the wand. Another point is the matching degree of the wand. Even though he was the son of Chris and Diana, their wands did not give Kyle any face, and the feeling of resistance was very obvious. Especially Diana's wand, in Kyle's hands, was no different from an ordinary stick, and no matter how much he cursed, he couldn't get any response. So most of Kyle's time before was spent dealing with Quidditch, herbs, and magical animals, with very little actual exposure to spells. After waiting for 11 years, I finally have my own wand. I must release it properly. Chris did not object to this, and he occasionally enthusiastically gave some guidance to overcome his addiction to being a teacher. Therefore, Kyle's room was almost always flashing with different spells. A few days ago, it was okay. Kyle was practicing basic spells and it wouldn't affect anyone else. But as time went on and Kyle mastered an increasing number of spells, the problem began to arise. On the dining table in the living room, Chris, who was drinking black tea, watched helplessly as the teacup placed opposite him suddenly left the table and began to slowly drift upstairs. However, Chris seemed to have become accustomed to this for a long time, calmly pressing the teacup back onto the table and lightly tapping it with his wand. After finishing all of this, he lifted his head and shouted, "Kyle, when reciting the flying curse, make sure to have a clear goal in mind. Also, I suggest starting with summoning feather pens or parchment, at least they won't break." "Okay, Dad." Kyle responded, but whether he heard it or not, Chris didn't know. He thought it was probably not. After all, situations like today have occurred several times, and he has recited more healing mantras in this day than in the past decade combined. For this reason, he had to apply an anti-flying spell on every fragile item at home. Whoosh! Just as he was thinking about it, a piece of bread flew quickly over his head, and then with a loud bang, it stuck to the ceiling. It must be admitted that in terms of effectiveness alone, Kyle's progress is still significant. At least the speed of this flying curse is much faster than last time. Sigh. Chris sighed and calmly waved his wand, sending the bread back to the kitchen while also marveling at Diana's wisdom and foresight in his heart. Thanks to her confiscating Kyle's crucible on the first day, otherwise the family wouldn't have turned into anything. The 11-year-old wizard is indeed known for his aversion to dogs, and his neighbor Weasley is no exception. Fortunately, these days are coming to an end, and Hogwarts will start school tomorrow. This is really good news. Chris picked up the black tea and drank it with a contented expression on his face. Time quickly arrived in the evening. Diana didn't come back because she had a task. Chris, who was completely clueless about cooking, gladly accepted Mrs. Weasley's generous invitation and brought Kyle and some prepared ingredients to the nearby shantytown for a meal. His behavior also unexpectedly caused Mrs. Weasley's dissatisfaction, believing that his behavior of bringing ingredients to his doorstep as a guest was wrong, and it was also a lack of trust in the friendship between both parties. It was a scolding to him. Chris didn't refute either, throwing the things in his hand into the kitchen and just chuckled in agreement. As for Kyle, she naturally got along with the children of the Weasley family. He had already witnessed this scene before him. Their family doesn't have any elves, so whenever Diana has a mission and can't come back, the two of them will come to Weasley's house to eat. And this kind of scene in front of me is always performed once every time I come, so it belongs to a fixed program. Not far away in the open space, Kyle is helping to clean up the goblins with a few Weasleys. It's said to be cleaning, but in reality, it's just playing. One person grabs the goblin's legs and throws them into the sky, while the other person holds a wooden stick and hits the goblin like a walking ball, flying it out. The farthest winner of this game can receive the first prize, a box of BB-flavored beans. At first, Chris didn't support their game, thinking that as long as the goblins were thrown out, there was no need to use a bat. Until one day he found out that he had worked hard to cultivate for a year, and the cloak grass that was about to mature was all dug up by these goblins. He never stopped Kyle again. Even a few days later on Christmas, he gave Kyle a well-crafted bat with the signature of a Wimbledon Hornets hitter on it. The bat is very easy to use and has a great feel when hitting. So far, it has helped Kyle win 5 consecutive championships. Today is no exception. This is unfair. Looking at Kyle's signature bat and then at the wooden stick he picked up casually, Ron said with a bitter face, "The equipment gap is too big. It's not that exaggerated. Equipment and everything else are secondary. What's important is to have the belief in winning in your heart. I won not because my equipment is good, but because I want to win more than you," Kyle said calmly, picking out a red bean and throwing it over. "Also, Ron, before you complain about the equipment, at least you have to beat Ginny. She uses a much smaller stick than you. There are a total of 5 people participating in the game, and Ron is the last one. Even Ginny's score is a few meters behind him." After Kyle finished speaking, Ron's face immediately turned red. Losing to his sister in this regard is not a glorious thing. However, his attention was quickly drawn to the Bibido-flavored beans thrown by Kyle. "Bright red, looks very beautiful, if you taste it. It's raspberry." Sure enough, the beans that Kyle gave to Bibi Duoway never tasted bad. The sweet feeling in his mouth made Ron unconsciously squint his eyes, and at the same time, he couldn't help but feel a hint of envy in his heart. I really don't know how Kyle managed to do it, but he could always pick out the best-tasting Bibido beans. He can't do it anymore. Every time it's not pork liver, it's spinach, and he even tasted dragon dung. The pungent smell mixed with the fermented pulp flavor was unbeatable, and Ron's stomach churned whenever he thought about it. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Dinner. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 7 Dinner. A box of BB-flavored beans. Kyle gave Ron one, ate one himself, and the rest went to Ginny's hands. The little girl held the box and thought for a moment, then ran over to Kyle's side, wanting him to help her pick it out, at least to pick out the dragon dung smell. Kyle fully understood Ginny's request and decisively refused it. Young people always have to try different things. Besides, what is the advertisement for BB Do-Away Dough? Each bite is a brand new adventure, which is the biggest feature of Do-Away Dough. Without the surprise, is that still called BB Do-Away Bean? No, that's called sugar beans. So it's not that he's lazy, it's all for Ginny's sake. After playing on the open ground for a while, Mrs. Weasley's familiar voice finally came from the direction of the burrow, and dinner was ready. The group of people who were already hungry and had their chests pressed against their backs threw down their wooden sticks and began walking back together. Kyle walked at the front, and Ron followed closely behind. Just before he took 2 steps, he was squeezed away by the twins who suddenly rushed towards him. Suddenly, Ron almost fell into the nearby goblin hole, which made him very angry. He looked angrily at Fred and George, and his face showed a look of if he didn't apologize, he would rush over and bite them. Ron may be very serious, but unfortunately he is destined to not achieve any results, because Farrell and George's attention is always on Kyle from beginning to end, and they have not even looked at Ron, so naturally they do not know what he thinks. Moreover, even if they knew about it, they probably wouldn't care. From childhood to adulthood, bullying my younger brother is not the first time they have done it. They have a clear understanding of the process involved. Don't be fooled by Ron's furious demeanor now. As long as he doesn't want to be beaten, he won't take the initiative to rush forward. Then wait a few days, and a little saved snacks can perfectly solve this problem. At that time, we will be brothers, friends, and sisters again, and be close to the beautiful family. So the most important thing now is to solve Kyle's problem. The incident that happened in Diagon Alley last time was seen by the twins as the biggest stain in their lives. They had been trying to find a place, but Kyle hasn't been out of the house these days and hasn't given them a chance to seek revenge. But if you voluntarily come to visit, it seems too deliberate and can easily arouse Kyle's suspicion. So Fred and George had to temporarily suppress their desire for revenge. They needed a suitable opportunity. For example, now. Due to the addition of Chris and Kyle, it was a bit crowded to have dinner in the room, so Mrs. Weasley set up the dining table in the yard. After Kyle habitually arrived at his usual seat, Fred suddenly gave a glance and quickly walked to the side to sit down. Although George was not sure what his plan was, he sat on the other side of Kyle at the first time thanks to the amazing understanding between the two. Kyle was a bit surprised to see this scene, as it was the first time he had seen twins sitting apart. Immediately afterwards, Kyle raised her eyebrows lightly and said, "The visitor is not kind." The twins are showing such obvious signs, and if he hasn't noticed anything unusual yet, it would be too late. But because he wasn't sure what medicine they were selling in their gourd, Kyle didn't act recklessly and continued to help Mrs. Weasley set the plate as if nothing had happened. Soft and crispy small bread, soft and sticky roasted potatoes, fragrant and oily roasted chicken, golden fried chicken chunks, tender and juicy small steak. Although they are all old friends, in terms of specifications, they can definitely be called abundant. Of course, Kyle didn't expect to have anything else to eat here, he just hoped that the house elves at Hogwarts could give him some surprises. Don't expect Chinese food, just French food, even pasta or pizza is fine. After the last plate was served on the dining table, everyone took their seats and dinner officially began. Kyle is particularly careful, afraid of accidentally eating some strange things. He doesn't want to die in public. Under Kyle's vigilance, nothing happened. The twins were just as happy as usual, telling jokes while eating, and everyone was happy without any abnormal behavior. Until halfway through dinner, when the table was at its busiest. After telling a joke about the Slytherin oil-headed monster, Fred seemed to suddenly think of something and turned his head and said, "Hi George, Kyle is going to Hogwarts tomorrow. Should we give him some help? For example, tell him some precautions during the division, as it can be very dangerous." George immediately understood and pretended to think for a while, actually trying to swallow the steak in his mouth, before cooperating. "I don't think it's necessary, Fred. We need to trust Kyle, he's very powerful. It's just an adult monster, Kyle can definitely defeat it and pass the division smoothly." "I think you're right, George," Fred nodded seriously and said, and being proud like Mr. Kerchoba, he definitely wouldn't take our advice seriously. He wouldn't even call us senior. Fred's plan is very simple. While Kyle is not yet enrolled, use the situation at the branch to scare him. If it could make him suffer from insomnia for a whole night, it would be even better. And for the current occasion, this prank is not only unstoppable, but can even receive off-court support, which is simply perfect. Fred looked proudly at Kyle, who had avenged Diagon Alley. As expected by Fred, their conversation immediately caught the interest of nearby adults who joined in one after another. The new student branch has always been a reserved program for the graduating wizards in the British wizarding world, who tirelessly use this same topic to deceive generation after generation of young wizards. It seems like Kyle's turn this time. "Darling, don't believe them." Mrs. Weasley was the first to express her position. After scolding the twins harshly, she looked at Kyle and said, "It's not that scary, it's just going to pass the test of a group of ghosts. It's not dangerous at all." "Molly, how could you deceive the child?" Mr. Weasley also didn't want to fall behind and tried to keep his face straight, glaring at his wife. "Kyle is a great child, and we can tell him the truth. I believe he can also tame a winged eagle-headed horse alone." "Eagle-headed horse winged beast. Isn't it a fire dragon?" Chris hesitated for a moment and then said firmly to Kyle, "Son, I believe Dad is right. It must be a fire dragon. And according to my speculation, this year should be a Hungarian tree bee." "Oh, I see. Well, yes, I can. I believe you, Dad." Kyle is like a nodding machine, and after each person finishes speaking, he will respond with a sentence and show the corresponding expression in a timely manner. Mrs. Weasley is fortunate. Mr. Weasley is resolute. My own father is hesitant. Poor magic world, what kind of entertainment can they have? It's nothing more than Quidditch, deceiving and deceiving children. They only have a little fun, so if they can cooperate, they can just play a role. It's not that difficult. Now everyone is very satisfied, that's great. The table was filled with joy, without noticing two helpless figures trembling in the corner of the dining table. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Mr. Weasley's Wilderness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Mr. Weasley's Wilderness. The usual deceitful behavior of adults certainly won't deceive Kyle, but it's not without gains. At least they scared Ron and Ginny on the side. Especially Ron. When we talked about this topic, he was quite interested and listened enthusiastically, hoping to accumulate some experience in advance for next year's school start. But the further he listened, the uglier his face became. Giant monsters, ghosts, eagle-headed horses with winged beasts, and so on are not considered. Although it is outrageous, as long as you turn your head and run, there should still be a chance of survival. After all, Hogwarts professors are not just decorations. But what's the situation with the fire dragon? A magical animal at the level of XXXXX, even an adult wizard may not survive, let alone an 11-year-old wizard. I'm afraid by the time the professors have not finished reciting their spells, he will have been blown to ashes by a sneeze. Is this a special school? Ron was so heartbroken that he even had the idea of running away from home. He didn't want to go to Hogwarts anymore, he really didn't want to go, he just wanted to live. Ginny on the side is not doing much better either. Her small face was pale, and her originally beautiful red hair had become much dimmer. What's wrong, Ginny? Kyle, sitting across from him, saw this behind the scenes and asked with concern, "Why don't you eat? Are you feeling unwell?" "No, no." Ginny clearly didn't want to admit that she was scared in front of her family. Seeing Kyle looking at her, she quickly shook her head and said, "It's just that she's full." A 9-year-old girl already has a weak appetite, and with the addition of eating half a box of BB-flavored beans before, Ginny has indeed eaten almost everything by now. She was about 80% full, just in a state where she could eat or not. However, the sudden topic of separation made her only little appetite disappear. "Well, that's really a pity." Kyle didn't realize he was there, just stood up and calmly put the motionless grilled fish in front of Ginny into his plate. Roasted fish is not like other foods. Once the time is long, the taste will be greatly reduced, which is too regrettable. It's better to eat it yourself. Another thing worth mentioning is that Mrs. Weasley's grilled fish technique is excellent, and it is a unique skill that can be squeezed out of the box. But because we have to take care of a large family in our daily lives and the task of picking fish bones is quite troublesome, we can usually only taste Mrs. Weasley's skill during important holidays. Of course, part of the reason is that fish are relatively expensive in the magical world. But no matter what, Kyle has been craving it for a long time, so it's impossible to watch this delicious dish go to waste. Ginny also knew this, but she didn't stop it. She originally wanted to keep the grilled fish until the end and savor it slowly, but after learning that she would face the dragon in 2 years, she was in no mood to eat. She could only watch with a heart-wrenching expression as Kyle stuffed her own grilled fish into her mouth. "Finally, just turn your head and take a look without seeing anything." At the same time, Fred and George beside him also sighed together. They had been staring at the grilled fish for a long time, but unfortunately Kyle's movements were too fast, and they didn't even have a chance to take action. The unwilling twins turned their gaze to Ron again. Unfortunately, Ron doesn't have Ginny's habits. His grilled fish has long turned into bones, and the ones he nibbled on are so clean that even the Froberg caterpillar can slip on it. What's wrong with Ron? Are you afraid of the fire dragon? Fred squinted his eyes, concealing his true intentions while also caring about Ron's current state. He affectionately patted his shoulder and comforted him, "Don't worry, the fire dragon only has 1 year. When you start school, it should be replaced by another magical animal." "I think it's a spider," George immediately added. "I've seen them all in the Forbidden Forest, and they're all about the same size as goblins. Maybe they were prepared by Hagrid for the branch ceremony." "No." Ron was feeling unwell, and the panic in his eyes began to soar rapidly. Instinctively, he threw away the cutlery and ran back to the shack screaming. It can be seen that Ron was really scared. He didn't even notice how wicked the twins laughed when he ran away. However, twins are not completely without a cost. "George, why did you appear in the Forbidden Forest?" Mrs. Weasley keenly realized the key to the problem and looked at the twins with a serious expression. "I don't remember Hogwarts allowing first-grade students to go to the Forbidden Forest." "Mom, I can explain." Fred and George wanted to run, but as they had just entered 2nd grade, they were clearly not a match for Mrs. Weasley and were quickly caught. Next came the familiar scene of maternal kindness and filial piety. Although this scene has been performed countless times in the past 11 years, Kyle still enjoys watching it and his appetite has improved significantly. The twins have been to the Forbidden Forest, and Kyle doesn't doubt it, but the spider incident was probably fabricated to scare Ron. It's just that he accidentally hit the nail on the head. After all, the 8-eyed giant spider in the Forbidden Forest is not a harmless little cutie. If they had really met, they would probably have settled in the Forbidden Forest by now. And Kyle remembers that the nest of the 8-eyed giant spider was still deep in the Forbidden Forest, and Fred and George couldn't run that far. The twins are not called Harry Potter, they only enjoy pranks, not death. About 20 minutes later, dinner was almost over. Although there were some minor interruptions during the process, it could be considered as a celebration between the guests. At least Kyle is very happy. After tidying up the table briefly, Percy went upstairs to review her homework. Ron, who was carrying a small bundle and wanted to run away from home, was caught and replaced by the twins. He was being chased around the yard by Mrs. Weasley. And Mr. Weasley and Chris changed places to continue chatting. "Chris, your performance just now was too exaggerated." Mr. Weasley said regretfully, "It's just a branch, how could there be a dragon? Little Kyle is so smart, he must know we're lying to him." "No, Arthur, you're wrong. In fact, this plan was destined to be impossible from the beginning." Chris shook his head and said somewhat helplessly, "Kyle has been staying with Mr. Scamander for at least 2 months every year since he was 3 years old. Do you think he's afraid of trolls and winged hippograms? Also, Arthur, did you forget that Kyle's surname is also Joba, Mr. Weasley was momentarily stunned and scratched his head awkwardly. "Are you saying that he can communicate with magical animals just like you?" "Of course," Chris nodded and said, "so he wouldn't be afraid of a winged eagle-headed horse. It's probably only a fire dragon that can make him feel nervous." Mr. Weasley glanced at Chris and said with some envy, "What a magical ability. If only I could also communicate with those muggle items." "What?" Chris paused for a moment and said with a dry smile, "Actually, it's not as exaggerated as you think. This talent is only limited to magical animals, like mice, toads, owls, and other ordinary animals. We can only rely on experience to guess their meanings. Chris's meaning is very clear, even if Mr. Weasley one day uses some strange magic to change his surname to Joba. Then he can only have a few words with things like flyer or golden snitch. As for bread makers or cars, give up, it's impossible, don't even think about it." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Hogwarts Express. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Hogwarts Express. September 1st is a very important day in the British wizarding world, especially for wizards over 11 years old who have not yet graduated. On this day, Hogwarts starts school. The young wizard, who has just turned 11, is eagerly anticipating day and night, hoping that this day will come soon. But wizards between the ages of 12 and 17 may not necessarily think so, because the start of school signifies the official end of a happy summer vacation, and they must also face those forgotten summer homework. This is not good news. This is particularly evident in the twins Kyle and Weasley. On the open space in front of the Burrow house, Kyle standing at the front was very excited, while Fred and George behind him were full of nervousness, and they would occasionally gather together and whisper, as if they were going to Hogwarts for the first time. Yes, Kyle is also here. Chris had originally planned to take his phantom and move over directly, but before setting off, he happened to encounter Mrs. Weasley knocking on the door. Mrs. Weasley seemed to have guessed he was going to do this long ago. The first thing Chris said when she saw him was that there were too many muggles at King's Cross Station, and using phantom shift would easily be seen. It was too unsafe, so we had to let Kyle go with them no matter what. Chris wanted to say something more, but seeing Mrs. Weasley's resolute attitude, he could only swallow those words again and nodded in agreement. Kyle, on the other hand, rubbed her forehead with some helplessness. He really wanted to tell Mrs. Weasley that in Muggle's eyes, getting 9 people off a Ford was much more terrifying than suddenly having 2 more people in front of him. After all, there is no Ganges, and Ford is not a legendary car with a diamond emblem. You can sit as much as you want. But unfortunately, he was only 11 years old and was easily ignored. Just as she was thinking about it, Mrs. Weasley suddenly came to Kyle's side and asked with concern, "Darling, have you all packed up?" Of course. Kyle, who had regained his senses, kicked a large box next to his foot and said, "I checked it 3 times before going out, and everything was quite good." "That's good," Mrs. Weasley nodded with a smile. As he spoke, Mr. Weasley also parked a vintage-looking car in front of everyone. This is their mode of transportation for this trip, a 9-handed Ford that they found out from somewhere, but Mr. Weasley really likes it, it's really precious. What are you waiting for? Get in the car. Under Mr. Weasley's urging, Chris got into the car first. Seeing this behind the scenes, Kyle also knew that he was too late to say anything and could only reluctantly follow up, followed by the Weasley family. The car was equipped with a seamless expansion spell, and even with 9 people sitting and a lot of luggage, there was no feeling of congestion. Mr. Weasley's driving skills are very good, and Kyle didn't feel any obvious bumps along the way, nor did he experience sudden braking or a 3-nod start, which is much stronger than a certain bus. Around 10 o'clock, they arrived at King's Cross Station on time. Fortunately, the situation Kyle had anticipated did not happen, or in other words, the people around him did not even pay attention to a broken and old Ford car. The group smoothly arrived at a pillar between the 9th and 10th platforms. After arriving here, there is basically no need to worry about being discovered by Muggles anymore. There is a Muggle destroyer curse nearby, and ordinary people will subconsciously ignore everything that happens here. Even if there are occasional special circumstances, members of the nearby Ministry of Magic will handle them immediately and safely. The crowd skillfully lined up and, under the command of Mrs. Weasley, passed through the pillars in front of them, arriving at the famous Platform 9. This place is much livelier than outside. There is a deep red steam train parked next to the platform, and the sign hanging on it reads, Hogwarts Express. It seems I'm not late, a gentle voice came from behind Kyle. Upon hearing the familiar voice, Kyle suddenly turned around and saw Diana smiling at him. Mom! Kyle exclaimed in surprise, didn't you have a mission before? Of course it's already done. Diana crouched down and tidied up Kyle's clothes. Today is your first time going to school, and I don't want to miss such an important day. That's good. Kyle was also very happy. If only Chris came to take him to Hogwarts, it would be a pity. Diana spoke to Kyle a few more words, and only then did she send him onto the train when it was about to depart. Finally, she instructed, I think Chris has already told you about the general situation at Hogwarts. I won't repeat it, but there's one thing I don't think he said. Diana stared at Kyle with her deep blue eyes and said seriously, Darling, your father and I have both graduated for a long time, and we don't want to reminisce about our college life. So please don't let us receive any letters from professors, including Dumbledore, is that okay? Don't worry, Mom, Kyle smiled and said, I won't violate school rules. They have no reason to send letters home. Of course, dear. Diana lightly kissed Kyle's cheek and watched him get on the train. Also, don't forget to tell us the results of the division. I will. Kyle nodded before turning around and getting on the train. A few minutes later, the train slowly left the platform, and Diana finally withdrew her gaze. Not far behind her, Chris just finished his conversation with a middle-aged man and walked up to Diana in 3 or 2 steps. Mr. Diggory is showing off his son again. Diana smiled. Obviously, she also knows the person who is talking to Chris. Amos Diggory, like Chris, works at the Magic Animal Management and Control Department of the Ministry of Magic, and also has a child studying at Hogwarts. But 1 year older than Kyle, and in the same grade as the twins of the Weasley family. But unlike the mischievous twins, that child is excellent in all aspects, similar to Percy in the beginning. Therefore, Diggory, this young prodigy, almost always praised his son when talking to people throughout the year. It's just a matter of once or twice, and people will also praise him a few times, but he can't resist saying it all the time. Who can bear it? So Diggory gradually became one of the least popular members of the Ministry of Magic, especially those parents with children studying at Hogwarts but average grades who would never meet him unless necessary. Even if I occasionally come across it, I always rush by with my head down, and if I can, I won't talk. Those who cannot avoid it, such as those encountered in the elevator or colleagues like Chris in the same department, will immediately find excuses to leave after a few pleasantries and never give him the opportunity to change the topic. And this time, Chris obviously couldn't avoid it. Cedric is indeed excellent. Chris smiled bitterly and said, "Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. Have you really completed your task?" Although he is not familiar with the specific situation of the Mysterious Affairs Department, he also knows that the tasks that can appear there are at least on a monthly basis, and situations like this that can be completed in 2 days are almost impossible to exist. "Of course not," Diana squinted her eyes and said, "but my colleagues are all very talkative, just taking a little leave, they won't say anything." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Cedric. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Cedric. After Kyle got on the train, the first few carriages were mostly filled with people. There's no way, who wants him to be the car on the checkpoint? It's not easy to find a vacant seat at this time. Kyle carried his luggage with a floating spell and finally found a relatively spacious carriage at the end of the train. There is only one boy in this carriage, who is about the same age and looks. Although he may not be as good as himself, he is much stronger than the 2 twins from the Weasley family. Bang bang. Kyle knocked on the carriage door and politely asked, "Hello, can I sit here? The rest of the room is full." "Of course, just sit down," the person quickly said. "Thank you." After entering the carriage, Kyle first placed the luggage on the shelf and then extended his hand to the other party. "Hello, I am this year's freshman, Kiljoba." The person seemed to be thinking about something and didn't respond immediately. After the reaction, he quickly reached out and said, "Oh. Sorry, Cedric Diggory, a second-year Hogwarts student." Cedric. Kyle was a bit surprised, but as soon as he got on the train, he met an acquaintance. The future hero of Hogwarts. No wonder he was so handsome. Kyle remembers that his family also lived near the village of St. Couchpole, but for various reasons, the two had never met before. Not even once. Kyle also went to see him a few times at first, but the door to the Diggory house was always tightly closed, and over time Kyle gave up. I didn't expect the first time they met was on the train. However, Kyle didn't say much when he saw that the other person seemed to have something on his mind. After a brief greeting, he took out the book Ordinary Spells and Techniques he bought from Lycan bookstore and started reading it. The other party continued to daydream. I don't know when it started to drizzle outside the car window. It's always like this here, rain always comes without warning. Kyle looked up outside the window and didn't pay attention. He had already gotten used to it, and he also quite enjoyed reading in such an environment. Under Kyle's influence, Cedric didn't go into a daze anymore. He also took out a book and read it. The cover should read, "Dark Forces. A Guide to Self-Defense." It's perfectly normal for Hogwarts students to preview the defense against the dark arts on the opening train. After all, no one knows how long the professor of this course can hold on this year. In case they fall asleep after 2 classes, it's always good to preview in advance. In the following period, only the sound of the parchment flipping was left in the carriage, in stark contrast to the noise outside the corridor. However, this situation did not last long. Cedric had not finished reading 2 pages when the door of the carriage was opened again. "Finally found you, Kyle. We deliberately reserved a spot for you, but you stood us up and made us wait foolishly until now. I think you should apologize to us." Fred and George leaned against the door, each asking Kyle a geological question. And their expressions were both quite angry, as if Kyle had done something outrageous. "I can apologize." Kyle calmly closed the book in his hand and said, "But the premise is that you must swear to Big Shit Egg to prove that what you just said is true." In an instant, Fred's anger turned into a tangled expression. "So, can I swear in the name of the principal?" George also said, "Or Professor McGonagall would do the same." "No way." Kyle shook his head. "It can only be a big fecal egg." "Oh, George, I think Kyle should be taking the Hogwarts Express for the first time. He's not familiar with this place, so he didn't find us." "Yes, Fred, we can't blame him. We should pay more attention to what's outside." The twins looked at each other and silently ignored what had just been said, squeezing into the carriage as if nothing had happened. Inevitably, they also saw Cedric. Fred smiled mischievously and said, "Look who this is, I can't remember why." George raised his eyebrows and said, "Of course it's our good boy at Hogwarts, Mr. Cedric Diggory, the light of the hitch patch." As soon as the two of them finished speaking, Cedric's face turned red. With a string of shameful prefixes, he almost pulled a hole in the train. But he couldn't refute it. Because the titles of Good Child and The Light of Hitchhiker were both passed down from his father, in just one summer vacation, the entire Ministry of Magic was already widely known. Of course, it also includes their families. Therefore, during this summer vacation, almost half of the signatures in the letters Cedric received turned into the Light of the Hitchcock. The remaining half are classmates from Muggle families who are unaware of this matter. It was precisely because of this incident that he deliberately chose the car in the most corner, but was unexpectedly discovered, and it was also the two most troublesome people. "Please, let me go." Cedric clasped his hands and pleaded, "I can lend you my homework." During the conversation, a stack of parchment was placed on the table. The twins originally wanted to joke a few more words, but unfortunately the price offered by the other party was too high. "That's the top homework in the grade." George's expression straightened as he quickly hugged the parchment in his arms and said seriously, "What are you talking about?" "Cedric, of course we know it's not your intention. It was just a joke just now." "That's right." Fred nodded aside and said, "Don't worry, we won't mock you just because of this." Fred and George left with smiles on their faces, as if they had found Garon. As soon as they left, Cedric also breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Kyle with some embarrassment, saying, "Sorry, I should be the one apologizing." Kyle interrupted him and said, "After all, they came to find me, otherwise you wouldn't have been discovered." Cedric shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "It's a matter of time. He can hide on the train, but when he arrives at Hogwarts, he can't. He always has to face time." Moreover, the sudden appearance of the Weasley brothers was not a bad thing, as they showed Cedric a way to solve the problem. That's homework. As the top student in his grade, his summer homework is still in high demand, as can be seen from the reaction of the Weasley brothers just now. So it should be no problem to use homework to seal the mouths of the two colleges, Hessapatch and Gryffindor. As long as we can control them, this matter can basically be considered as solving 80%. As for Ravenclaw and Slytherin, given the personalities of these two colleges, they probably wouldn't join in such a lively atmosphere, at least most people wouldn't. Even if there were a few occasionally, it wouldn't be a big deal. As long as the people in one's own college don't stir up trouble and there's no group of energetic lions like Gryffindor involved, this matter will be over for at most 3 days. It's only 3 days, soon. Thinking about it this way, Cedric suddenly felt that things didn't seem so bad anymore. End of this chapter.